Hello everyone, Ross McKinnon here with you to take you through this reading on ethical and professional standards. What we're going to do here is take you through a few little scenarios which show the practical application of the code of ethics that of course is so important to us as CFA candidates and indeed charter holders like myself. So what we're going to do, this reading is based on the longer scenarios that are in the Schweizer notes, and we're going to summarise the key points of each mini scenario. We've got lots of case facts to throw at you, and then after we've given you a few case facts, we're going to consider what potential violations, if any, have been carried out by the people in the scenario. So without further ado, let's get started. So before we dive into the scenarios themselves, let's just remind ourselves of a pretty decent framework to think about ethical decision making. So as a CFA candidate and charter holder, you're presented with facts and scenarios every day in our daily lives. It's important to get those facts correct. Okay, so we don't want to be going to our supervisor, reporting potential violations when we haven't got the facts straight. It's going to make us look pretty stupid, isn't it? So definitely identify the material facts and issues, get our facts straight as far as we can. We're never going to be able to get 100% proof of a potential violation, but if we've got reasonable suspicions, then we might have to take some action. The people in the scenario, to whom do they owe a duty of care? Okay, that's often going to be the client. It's often going to be potential clients, the employer, their colleagues, their supervisors, lots of potential people there to whom duties are owed. Try and identify some conflicts of interest. Again, those could be crystallised, they could be actual conflicts of interest, they could simply be potential conflicts down the line that we have to be aware of. When we're dealing with client suitability, so recommending investments for clients, we need to make sure that the investments that we're recommending are suitable. We need to have done our due diligence. We need to make sure that the investment policy statement's done properly and kept up to date regularly. If we're just recommending investments willy-nilly without the proper checks, then we're probably going to fall foul of those suitability problems. It's a bit of a poison chalice being a supervisor. We're going to see this in a couple of these scenarios. You need to make sure not only that your own ethical behaviour is up to scratch, but the people that you're supervising aren't misbehaving either. When you take on a role as a supervisor, then you do need to be keeping a close eye on those that you supervise, because their bad behaviour could reflect badly on you, and we certainly don't want that. And then we've got any circumstances that require judgment. Okay, so it's not always going to be cut and dried. Okay, the reason why we go through these professional qualifications in part is to make sure that we have that professional judgment so that we know what the appropriate action to take is in most cases. And then finally, what could we do? What are the possible actions for resolving the ethical dilemma? And what are the consequences of those actions? Hopefully, with these ideas in mind, we're going to be able to arrive at a suitable conclusion and resolution. Okay, let's dive into our first scenario then. This is the case of Maria Lopez, and well, she's doing pretty well. She's completed a master's degree in finance, that's no mean feat, and even more impressively, she's passed a CFA level 1 exam. So she's well on the road to that coveted charter. She's got a position in the wealth management department at Bank Global. Okay, so things are going pretty well for Maria, and our supervisor is reviewing a business card request. Maria is obviously keen to get networking and handing out those business cards. And she's asked that her business card contains her name and then CFA level 1 after her name. So already got a little bit of a warning sign. I'm sure you are thinking that too. And also our supervisor doesn't say that she can't have this on her business card. In fact, she says, do you know what? Put the year in which you expect to earn your charter. Okay, I'm not too keen on that request. I think my business card would it'd have to be very big if I was going to put all of my expected qualifications on there. But there we go. So our supervisor perhaps not giving her great advice, but we'll deal with these conclusions shortly. Okay, so within the bank, there's a 45-minute delay between a research analyst submitting a change to a recommendation, and then that recommendation, that information being sent on to Bank Global's clients. Okay, so there's a bit of a time delay. And because of that, the analysts will often verbally update Hockett's team. Remember, Hockett is Maria's supervisor, prior to updating their research in the system. So what this does, it gives Hockett's team the chance to contact some of their clients with any updates. So a time delay before all the clients get the information, but Hockett's team are being tipped off and they're going to be letting their clients know that something is about to change. Okay, again, already some alarm bells ringing there, I'm sure. Anyway, we're nearly there. Let's just complete the scenario. Lopez gets some new clients referred to her. So we have the Kachanskis, and she's told that the clients are 61 years old, both of them, and they've got $7.4 million to invest. So they've obviously made some good decisions throughout their life. Mary sold a business. This is Mary Kachansky. She sold her business, and they've got all of this lovely cash to invest. So Marie has been instructed to design a balanced portfolio for the client's needs, and she does so. But there might be a problem. She designs the portfolio by looking at selected funds that Bank Global operate, and she looks at their 5-year annualized returns to assess their performance. Crucially, she excludes any terminated accounts, just to simplify the analysis. Well, that sounds lovely, Maria. Okay, you've made your analysis more simple. Unfortunately, you've probably made your analysis less accurate. Excluding terminated accounts, so these are accounts that would have been closed at some point during the last 5 years. Maybe the reason they were closed is because they weren't doing very well. And of course, they've been excluded from the analysis. We all know what that's going to do to the performance information. All right, so this portfolio has been designed for them. The $7.4 million is invested in that portfolio. And Hockett, Maria's supervisor, he's having a chat with the banker who's referred the Kachanskis. He's discussing the incentive program, the compensation scheme that he operates in his department. He says that the majority of his clients have got low risk tolerance and tend to favour long-term investing. Okay, so that's the type of portfolios that should be being pushed towards these clients. He's actually found a way, though, Hockett, to earn excess return. Well, excess return sounds good, by frequently buying and selling high beta stocks. Okay, so high beta stocks, that's high systematic risk, of course, very volatile stocks, or at least they're going to be moving perhaps more than the market does. Okay, so very cyclical, quite high volatility. I'm just a little bit worried already that the low risk tolerance and the high beta stocks don't exactly match. So nearly there with the scenario, folks. Lopez decides to send a message to her close friends. Well, why wouldn't she? She's excited that she's taken on these lovely new clients under her wing. Okay, so those are the case facts. You're probably already thinking about possible violations. Let's run down what Maria or others in the scenario should do. Okay, well, to do with the business card, you called it, you're not allowed to suggest any partial designation. So you can't say CFA level 1. Okay, that's just not allowed. If we were going to be putting on a resume or a business card that she'd passed the level 1 exam, then that might be more appropriate. But certainly not CFA level 1 as a designation. And of course, no expected date for obtaining the charter. Just not allowed. That's a breach of standard 7B. Don't panic, you don't need to remember the numbers or the letters, you just need to know what's in the standard, which is, well, tough enough, but don't panic about learning those numbers and letters and trying to allocate them to each standard. That's not going to be required in the exam. Okay, now what about the early tip-off? Okay, so remember that 45-minute delay between the research team updating their recommendations and the entire client base being informed about it. Well, by circumventing that, by giving their own clients a heads up before all the other clients, then they're likely in breach of Standard 3B for fair dealing. Okay, you've got a small client base that's getting preferential treatment. Okay, so Hockett's discretionary clients, they're getting the tip off before the 45 minutes is up. So that's preferential treatment. Those clients are going to be able to deal before the remainder of the clients, and that's not allowed. You have to treat all clients fairly. Next up, the balanced portfolio. Okay, well, it doesn't look like the balanced portfolio that they've recommended has been subject to the required due diligence. Okay, so they've seemed to just look at the selected funds from the firm's portfolio, and they've recommended investments that perhaps don't meet the Kachanskis' objectives. Okay. In terms of removing terminated accounts, okay, this is part of the due diligence issue. That's going to give a distorted idea, really, of the performance of those funds. All accounts during that 5-year period should be included when calculating performance data. If you exclude any for whatever reason, you're not going to be given a full and clear picture of the performance of the fund. Okay, performance presentation. We'll talk a lot more about that when we deal with the GIPS requirements a little bit later on in the syllabus, but certainly Lopez has breached that. We talked about the high beta stocks and the low risk tolerance. Clearly, high beta stocks are not suitable for clients that need a low risk tolerance investment. So suitability, we've recommended and we've implemented investments that aren't suitable for our clients' needs, not allowed under Standard 3C. And, well, we've got a bit of a confidentiality issue. It's all very well Maria being excited that she's taking on some interesting new clients, but you're not allowed to disclose that fact to people outside the firm, or even perhaps people within the firm without good reason to do so. So she's certainly breached a confidentiality requirement, and she could find herself in quite a bit of trouble for doing so. Okay, a nice short little scenario there for Maria Lopez and Hockett and Bank Global to get us started. Slightly bigger one coming up now. Okay, so this is the scenario in the Schweizer notes. It's Castle Biotech. It's a bigger scenario, this one, so we're going to drip feed the case facts bit by bit. We're not going to come across all of the case facts at once. We're going to drip feed them to you in easy to manage chunks. So we're going to have a few case facts and then we'll talk about the potential violations, and then we'll give you some more. We'll extend the scenario and do the same until we're through to the end of the case. Okay, so what are we looking at? We've got Castle Biotech. They operate a biopharmaceutical company, it's easy for me to say, and controls 9 other biopharmaceutical companies. Excellent. So they're diversifying. They've acquired a controlling interest in Global Capital Management. Doesn't seem like a perfect fit for a bio company, but that's what they've done. Global are an investment management and asset management firm. And we've got 2 other subsidiaries who have recently went public, although Castle maintains a controlling interest. So just before we dive into the scenario, let's just state what's going on. So we've got Castle Bio, they're the ultimate parent company here. They've got a couple of subsidiaries, so we've got Street and Appaloosa. Okay, so let's call Street STRX, that's the designation given. We've got Appaloosa, which is APBX, and then, rather strangely, they've just acquired Global Capital Management as well. So all of these companies are subsidiaries of Castle. That's the structure that we're looking at today. Okay, so we have our hero, David Plume. He's an analyst, biopharmaceutical analyst for Global. Okay, so he's working for the asset management side of the business. He's got some biopharmaceutical experience, presumably, which is why he analyses those stocks. So presumably he's in the right sort of job. In fact, he is. He's a PhD, and he got his PhD from being a biochemist. Okay, so he knows Castle very well, ultimate parent company, remember. He's got close relations with Castle execs, and he's actually holding on to some shares as well. He's got both preferred stock and common stock of Castle. Okay, so he has a bit of an interest here in the ultimate parent company. His salary at Global, I'm sure it's very, very good, but it's not enough for him. So he gets an annual bonus as well. So 0.1% of the gross proceeds raised for each IPO he's involved in. Okay, so he's going to profit quite nicely from successful IPOs. And of course, we were told that recently Street and Appaloosa have gone public. Okay, so after the IPOs went public, he issued a buy recommendation on each firm. Okay, well, so far so good. Presumably he knows the firms pretty well, given that they're part of the same group that he ultimately works for. He's issued a buy recommendation, so after the IPO, perhaps that's generated a lot of interest and the share price has gone up through the roof. That's, I'm sure, what David's thinking of. Several months after issuing that buy report, again, remember the effect of that, hopefully, certainly from David's point of view, the shares would have gone up. He decides to sell some of these shares short. Okay, so he doesn't own the shares at the moment, but he's going to borrow them from somebody, I guess, and he sells them short. Remember, he's going to benefit then if the share falls. He's going to buy the shares back later, cover his short position, and if the price has fallen, he's going to make a nice little profit. So I'm just thinking, that buy report, was it really justified, or was it just to push the share price up? Maybe I'm being a bit too suspicious. Let's see. He does not disclose either that he's a beneficial owner of the stock. So he's not disclosing his short position. In fact, he's not disclosing that he owns shares in the ultimate parent company either. You know, those preferred shares and common stock we heard about earlier. He's having a bit of a disclosure problem, David. He also doesn't disclose the fact that Castle has a controlling interest both in the firm that he works for, Global, that's issuing the recommendations, as well as the 2 companies that have had recent IPOs. So David's being a little bit shy, I think, with his disclosures. Let's have a think what he might have done wrong. Okay, well, he might well have an independence and objectivity problem. Okay, so in the research report, when he issues his buy recommendation, he really should say that Global, the company who's issuing the recommendation, is controlled by Castle. And remember the little structure I drew up earlier on? Castle owns both Street and Appaloosa. If you're reading a research report that Global have issued, I would certainly want to know that fact, because David's report might have been perfectly proper, but I want all the information at hand if I'm reading it to make a judgment as to whether that's the case or not. Okay, there's certainly a perception that his independence and objectivity might have been affected. Okay, and certainly not disclosing the material personal ownership in Castle, so that's his common and preferred stock. The fact that Global's controlled by Castle, of course, he's violated disclosure of a conflict of interest there as well. Okay, likewise, he's not disclosed his material ownership in the two subsidiaries, so Street and Appaloosa, in his buy recommendation reports. Okay, so he owns Castle preferred and common stock, remember. Okay, Castle will profit if Street and Appaloosa do well. Okay, he does have an ultimate interest in those companies, and then he's later sold them short. He needs to disclose that as well. Okay, so really David needs to get a lot more talkative. Also, he needs to disclose his annual bonus as well. Okay, disclosure issues all over the place for David here. Again, that's a violation of the independence and objectivity standards. He needs to say to people who's reading his report, look, I'm going to profit if this IPO is successful. Okay, there's nothing wrong with the compensation agreement. Disclosure is the best course of action for him, though. At least then the people reading the report can make their own decisions. Okay, let's build the scenario up. So we have another heroine this time, Sandra Benning. So she used to work at a company called Kodiak Securities, and she's recently resigned to come and work for Global. Okay, so she's going to be a colleague of David Bloom. Now, when she resigned from Kodiak, she posted on social media, Twitter, Facebook, others are available, and also in her personal emails, so she's hit the computers quite hard to encourage her clients to move with her to Global. Okay, I think a key phrase here is going to be upon resignation. Okay, so we're assuming here that this isn't while she's serving out her notice with Kodiak, it's after she's left the firm. She's resigned, she's left, only then does she start tapping up her previous clients. Okay, so Global have given her a bit of an interesting compensation structure here. Her signing on bonus is not fixed. It's calculated on the percentage of her clients who transfer with her. So presumably, the more, well, not presumably, definitely, the more clients that she gets to come over, the bigger her pay packet is going to be. And her bonus is also containing an element on client IPO participation. So the more her clients participate in IPOs underwritten by the firm, then she's going to get more cash as well. So far, so good, I think. The problems coming up here, neither of those were disclosed by Benning to her clients. Okay, so she's encouraging her clients to come over. There may be some very good reasons why our client should follow her. She might be a superstar. Global might be far superior to Kodiak, who knows? But the clients, I think, are going to need to know about this compensation structure. Okay, and of course, that is the moral of the story. She's actually violated the conflict of interest standard twice. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? She didn't disclose the signing on bonus on the percentage, and she didn't disclose that part of her bonus was based in the participation in IPOs. She needs to disclose both. There is no violation, so don't fall into the trap of thinking she's not allowed to approach her previous clients. She didn't violate standard 4A on loyalty because, well, we're not told there was a non-compete agreement. If there was a non-compete agreement, then she would be duty-bound to honour that. But if we're not told that a non-compete agreement exists, then we have to assume there isn't one. She's left the previous firm. Nothing morally or ethically wrong with approaching previous clients. Okay, investment management's a competitive business. She's absolutely entitled to do so. So the trap is that you think, oh, she's done something wrong. Well, she hasn't really in terms of approaching her previous clients after she resigned. And again, that's the key phrase there. If she was still in the employ of her previous employer, then there would be a loyalty issue, but I don't think there is here. Okay, so Castle Biotech building up in complexity. Here's some more facts. There is another IPO, so Frontier Therapeutics. We're underwriting the IPO, so they're about to go public. And Frontier Therapeutics is one of the subs that's controlled by Castle. So this structure is getting more and more complicated. Remember those 9 other biotech companies? Well, we're just naming one of them here. So Frontier Therapeutics is one of Castle's subs. Okay, now IPOs, as I'm sure you're aware, they're often hot. Okay, so they're oversubscribed. Investors in the market are often clamoring to get a piece of the action. So allocating the shares in an IPO that's oversubscribed fairly is an important ethical standard that our CFA candidates who work for these investment firms need to abide by. Okay, so their allocation policy is to allocate the shares to institutional clients who agree to buy more shares on the first day of trading. So not only are they going to be allocated the shares, in order to get those shares, they have to promise that they're going to buy more on the first day of trading. That's likely to push the price up and it's going to make the IPO look more successful. Okay, this is known as a tie-in agreement, as the next slide makes clear. Okay, so a tie-in agreement is where we require them to purchase additional shares of the new issues after the IPO goes in the secondary market. And only by committing to do that will we allocate them the IPO shares in the first place. Okay, well, that's manipulating the market really, isn't it? It's artificially increasing demand for the shares on the first day of the IPO. It's going to push the shares upwards. Presumably there's enough of these buy orders to actually affect the share price. But if that's the case, then the share price is going to go up. It's going to look higher than it should be, and that is market manipulation. It's also a breach of the fair dealing standard. Okay, so we've got the market manipulation from this artificial increased demand, but it's a breach of the fair dealing standard because we're not treating all clients fairly. The institutional clients who do agree to the tie-in agreement are going to be unfairly advantaged compared to those who don't. And that's not allowed. Okay, we have to have a fair and ethical way of allocating those IPO shares amongst our clients. Okay, well, Sandra's been a little bit naughty here, falling foul of both the market manipulation and fair dealing standards. Let's see if our behaviour is going to improve when dealing with a new client. Okay, so we have Clarice Deacon. That's an individual rather than an institution, although it sounds like a company name a little bit, doesn't it? So Clarice Deacon is the new client. For whatever reason, Sandra, our heroine, Sandra Benning, she decides to modify the client agreement regarding suitability. Okay, so she's made a decision that the IPS, the agreement, needs updating. That's fine. Is she going to discuss this with the client? No, she's not. She's going to save the client coming in, so this is very noble of her. To save the client coming in, she just decides to initial the changes to the agreement on Clarice Deacon's behalf. So she's initialing the changes to make it look as if the client's agreed to the change when in fact they haven't. Now, she might have the best of intentions. She's just saving the client some commuting time and some travel expenses. I'm a bit sceptical though, as if that's a good justification. Okay, a little bit later on, so Clarice has some difficulty transferring funds into the account. Okay, so maybe the bank authorization hasn't gone through, something like that. And Sandra discovers that indeed the setup wasn't done properly. So there's maybe some boxes on the bank form that haven't been ticked. So she calls Clarice, presumably, and Clarice says, yeah, no problem, you can sign the new account linking form, the bank authorization form, on my behalf. And Sandra does indeed do that. Okay, perhaps later on the same day or shortly afterwards, she receives a call from Steve Deacon. So this is Clarice's husband. And sadly, Steve says that his wife is having major medical problems. Hope she gets well soon. But he says that Sandra needs to sell some assets and transfer the proceeds to the nominated bank account immediately. Steve may well be telling the truth, but perhaps he's not. We don't know. So Benning decides to believe him. She processes some share sales, some redemptions, and sends the cash to the nominated bank account. So the withdrawals from the share dealing account into the Deacon's account. And that's at Steve's request, and this happens over and over again over the coming weeks. I've just got that sinking feeling in my stomach about Sandra's ethical behaviour here again. I'm sure you do as well. Let's have a think. Shock. Sandra is not allowed to sign the form or initial the form on behalf of the client. That is absolutely misconduct. It's misleading to any future review of that file. You're not allowed to initial forms on the client's behalf. Only the client can do so. Despite the fact that she was given verbal authorization, sorry, still not good enough. The client needs to do it themselves. That is misconduct. Also, she's potentially not being loyal or taking due care when dealing with Clarice's account when she processes the transactions at her husband's request. Okay, so we didn't get Clarice's written consent for the redemptions and withdrawals. Steve may well be looking out for Clarice's best interest, but who knows? Okay, he might be a bitter, jilted husband. You know, they might be going through a divorce. We don't know. So she certainly should have checked out that situation a little bit more. Steve might not be acting with Clarice's best interests in mind. And he certainly doesn't have permission to make any transactions because he's not listed as a joint account holder. Okay, the scenario didn't mention the fact that he was. He wouldn't be automatically just because they're husband and wife. So really, for Steve to have power of action over Clarice's account, he needs to be listed as an account holder on the client documentation. Okay, well, that's Castle Biotech done and dusted. A few ethical violations in there. Let's see if we do any better with Lionsgate and Bank of Australia. So another quite large scenario here. So we're going to take it bit by bit. So let's dump some case facts into your consideration. First of all, so we have this company, Lionsgate Limited. They're a fund manager. And they have their flagship fund, appropriately named the Victory Capital Fund. And it's managed by Tony Hill. Okay, so Tony Hill is the superstar investor. Tony Hill and his team manage the Victory Capital Fund, and perhaps Victory is an appropriate name because it is the best performing equity fund in Australia. So we're down in Oz for this scenario. So over the last 10 years, 28.7% gross. That's over the last 1 year period, and it's 13.2% annually since inception. So best performing over 10 years, 28.7% last year. That's the opposite of what my personal investments do, of course, and 13.2% annually since it was founded. So pretty impressive fund there. And in fact, Tony Hill he's a bit of a media darling. So he appears on financial talk shows. Just like me, I think. They give him some perks, I think, for appearing on the talk shows. I have never appeared on a financial talk show, so I've got no idea if this is standard practice. I'm sure it is. So he gets some wine, he gets some retail gift cards and some travel discount. Brilliant to be famous, isn't it? He does not disclose those items to Lionsgate. Anyway, perhaps because he's doing the talk show circuit, he's become less involved with the Victory Capital Fund recently. In fact, over the last 3 years, this is a little bit nasty, isn't it? The performance of the fund is all down to Nicole Martin. Okay, so Nicole Martin's actually the brains behind the face. So Tony Hill's taking all this credit. In fact, publicly, both Nicole and Tony, so Martin and Hill, they still pretend that Hill's in charge of all investment decisions. Okay, because he's the face of the fund and investors think that he's the whiz kid, Nicole goes along with it. So the clients are being told that Tony is still in charge of all investment decisions. Okay, so that's the initial scenario. Let's build it up. There's a board meeting of Lionsgate and Tony says he's off. Okay, so he's going to resign and he's going to be starting his own firm, presumably leveraging that reputation that he's got. So the boards, I guess, they're gutted, aren't they? They're devastated. So they say, oh, look, please don't tell anyone. So don't disclose to anyone over the next 2 weeks while we look for a replacement. And Tony agrees to that one. Tony agrees, then leaves the board meeting and then tells everyone. So he tells his team that he's leaving and he asks his team to come across with him. So rather predictably, he's asking Nicole and others to go along to the new firm. Okay, and he says, well, look, I want you to come with me. Don't spend any time in office hours working on this transfer, but after work, so you guys know that's 1 minute past 5, and at weekends to work on the transition. Okay, so outside of office hours and weekends, they're going to be paving the way for this transition. He says, don't worry, there's no non-compete agreement, so we can start to solicit clients as soon as the new firm is established. Okay, so remember at the start of this reading, we looked at non-compete agreements, and in the absence of a non-compete, it's okay to solicit clients after resignation. I'm not sure that's exactly what Tony's saying here. He's saying as soon as the new firm is established. I wonder if there's going to be a bit of overlap. Okay, so let's drill down into what's happened so far and identify any possible ethical violations. Okay, well, the statement about the Victory Fund being the best in Australia and the performance data, 28% last year, was it 13% since inception? We're not told they're not true. Okay, so the assumption is that they're factual statements. As long as they are true, no violation of the performance presentation standard. If the scenario told us that the figures have been massaged, Remember earlier we were talking about excluding terminated accounts. That would be a problem, but there's nothing to indicate a problem with the performance data here. Likewise, there's actually no problem with Hill doing the talk show circuit. Okay, presumably he's there bigging up Lionsgate and the Victory Fund, so he's perfectly entitled to accept these non-monetary items. Even the fact he hasn't disclosed it to Lionsgate isn't a problem. Okay, they're non-monetary, they're not hugely material, so he's not violated the standard on that. But there the good news ends. Okay, so Nicole Martin and Tony Hill, they both know that Nicole is the driving force behind the performance, and they are quite happy not only to allow clients to think that Tony's still making the decisions, but to actively tell them. Okay, so they've certainly violated standard 5B1 on communication with clients. Okay. In the board meeting, Tony agreed. He gave his word not to tell anyone that he was leaving the firm for a two-week period. He left the room and told his team. So he's broken that agreement. That is a breach of the standard loyalty to the employer. Okay, so if he hadn't agreed that in the board meeting, then perhaps there wouldn't be a problem. But there certainly is here. Asking his team to work with him is not a problem. Okay, not on the face of it. Team members can absolutely they're free to make their own decisions. You know, if it's a free country, they can do what they want. Likewise, performing activities for the transition outside of normal business hours is not a violation. They're allowed to pave the way for the transition as long as they're not doing it on Lionsgate company time. And the scenario, I think, made clear that that was not the case. So no problem with doing it outside of working hours. Likewise, there's no problem in asking his team to solicit former clients after they move to the new firm. Okay, so we just need to be careful with this one. After the new firm is established, as long as they've left the previous firm, so the new firm is established, the team and Tony, they've gone to work for the new firm, a bit like the previous scenario in the reading, they're perfectly entitled to solicit the former clients after they go. Okay, elsewhere in Lionsgate, we have another star of the show. Okay, so we've got Rob Portman. He's a salesperson for the fund. Okay, so he's selling units in the Victory Fund, and he's set up a big sales event for prospective clients, okay, so that he can meet his annual sales targets. Well, good for you, Rob. That's what you're supposed to do. So to current clients and prospective clients who turn up to the event, well, Portman is emphasising the skills of Tony Hill, our superstar face of the Victory Fund. He's also emphasising his role as the primary portfolio manager. Okay, now we know that's a problem because Tony isn't the main portfolio manager. He's not the main decision maker. It's Nicole Martin. Rob is a salesman, so perhaps he's not equipped to deal with detailed technical client questions. So when he receives those about investment management, he directs clients to Nicole Martin. Remember, she's the brains behind the operation, and she's referred to as Tony's assistant. It's like she goes and gets his coffee and does jobs for him. Nicole's taking this very well. I can't believe that she can be happy about it. Okay, so down the company grapevine, I'm sure you know what that's like in your own places of work. He hears some rumours about Tony and the team leaving at Lionsgate. So he asked the Chief Investment Officer, who presumably would know all about it, what's going on. And the CIO says, don't worry, it's not happening. Okay, disregard the rumours, it's not true. So presumably Rob is happy with that. And then he hears through public information that the Chief Investment Officer and some other board members have recently sold some shares, not just in the Victory Fund, but in Lionsgate itself. Okay, so Rob's found this legitimately through public sources. I guess Rob is now thinking maybe the CIO fed him a line, maybe he wasn't telling the truth, so he decides to sell his own shares in Lionsgate and the Victory Fund as well. Okay, what's possibly gone wrong here? Well, we know that by representing Tony as the face of the fund and referring to Martin as the assistant, that is misrepresentation. Okay, so Tony's no longer making the investment decisions. So a bit like in the previous scenario with Lionsgate, that is a misrepresentation problem. Okay, now the CIO and the board members, now they've heard about Tony leaving the firm. Now when this knowledge becomes public, presumably there's going to be a bit of a sell-off, both of Lionsgate and the Victory Fund, as investors think, well, the superstars left, perhaps the skills have left as well. So they've used that inside information, material non-public information of Tony leaving to sell their shares. Okay, so they've violated the standard on material non-public. They're not allowed to trade based on that material insider information. That's the CIO and the board members who've sold the shares. Remember, that's what Rob found out. Rob himself, he has not traded using material non-public information because all he knows is that the CIO and the board members have sold the shares. That's public knowledge. So Rob selling his shares is not a violation of the standard because it was based on public knowledge. Okay, so he might have his suspicions about why the chief investment officer and the other board members have sold the shares, but it's not factual. He doesn't know for certain. So Rob is in the clear on the material non-public information standard. Of course, don't forget, he's not in the clear on representation. He's not a complete saint because he knows that Tony is not actually the decision maker behind the fund. Okay, a little bit more then in the scenario with Lionsgate. We're now told that they're partially owned by the Bank of Australia. Okay, so we've got Bank of Australia, partial ownership at least of Lionsgate. Whoever the other owners are, we're not told, but there's certainly a close link there. We have another scenario player here. We've got Kirk Graham. Now he's a financial advisor for BOA's wealth management group. So presumably he's advising wealthy clients of Bank of Australia on investments, IPOs, that sort of thing. Now, perhaps not uncommon, he gets additional compensation on top of his salary for new issue purchases, and that compensation is paid by the issuer. Okay, again, not altogether uncommon, so there's an incentive for Kirk to make sure that new issues are successful and perhaps to advise his clients to purchase new issues. Bank of Australia elsewhere has a capital markets group. Remember, Kirk is part of the wealth management group. There's a capital markets group as well, and they often participate in new issues purchased by Graham. Okay, again, nothing too unusual in that respect. The policy itself, so Bank of Australia has a policy. It doesn't require its analysts like Kirk or its advisors like Kirk to disclose commissions on new issues. So what they say is that clients have already received information in the prospectuses. So maybe buried deep in page 98 of the prospectus is the fact that advisors might get some commissions, so they don't need to be told again. Kirk is happy with that. He decides he's only going to disclose commissions to clients that ask about it. So he's going to be perfectly honest and upfront. If a client reads the prospectus back to page 357, Appendix B, and finds that commissions are payable to the advisors, and he's asked about it, he'll be honest. But for clients that don't ask about it, he's going to keep stum. Okay, so what's gone wrong here and what's gone right? Well, it's a violation, of course, only to inform the clients who ask about commissions. It's not a justification to say that, well, buried deep in the prospectus you were told about it, so we don't need to tell you again. Really, information must be disclosed to all clients. It doesn't matter whether it was already included in the prospectus. We need to be upfront. We need to be as transparent as possible. And at the time of giving advice, he needs to disclose the fact he has a beneficial interest in this new issue being successful. Okay, so Kirk has been a naughty boy so far. Let's see if his behaviour is going to improve. So he opens a joint account for the Delaney's, Melissa and Rodney. And in the joint account, they've put in most of their investable assets. Okay, and the Delaney's have said we have a long investment horizon, so 15 years plus, and a low risk tolerance. So what the Delaney's are wanting is some low risk investments that Kirk can invest on their behalf and hold on for quite some time. So what does Kirk do? He completely disregards it. Over the next 2 months, he's purchasing new issues, fairly risky investments themselves, new issues of equity shares. And the longest holding period for any of these new issues was 5 months. Now we're told that the Delaney's have a long investment horizon and low risk tolerance, so he's buying risky new issues and only holding on to them for 5 months. I'm not sure Kirk read the memo. Anyway, Jane is Kirk's supervisor, Kirk Graham's supervisor. She has some concerns as well. She might about his handling of the accounts, and she refers Kirk Graham upwards to the Director of Compliance. And Graham, perhaps in response to that, has substantially curtailed the bad behaviour. Okay, so after he gets found out, he knows that Jane has referred him to the Director of Compliance. He begins to rein it in. Okay, obviously the Delaney's have a low risk tolerance, and Kirk Graham, therefore, has recommended investments that are entirely unsuitable. Okay, he's invested in new issues for only a short period of time. 5 months was the longest holding period, so clearly unsuitable investments. He has breached that standard. And in fact, we said at the start of the reading, it's sometimes a poison chalice being a supervisor. Jane Balmer, the supervisor, she's not done everything she should have done either. Simply referring the situation upstairs to the direction of compliance, insufficient. She should have opened up a full investigation. So she's actually she's breached the standard on responsibilities of supervisors. Yeah, those supervisors out there, be careful. You can't just refer it upstairs and wash your hands of it. A full investigation would have been required. Okay, let's continue the saga of Kirk Graham. He's opened account for another client 5 years ago, David Milgram. He put together an investment policy statement. Of course, you've got your objectives and constraints in there. And it's not been updated since, and that's 5 years ago. A lot of things can happen in 5 years. Not entirely convinced with it. That's okay. Recently, Milgram has complained to Balmer, remember Balmer is Graham's supervisor, about the decline in the account's value. Okay, clients complain about bad investments all the time. Doesn't necessarily mean the investment managers have done anything wrong. So again, I think Kirk Graham's taking up a lot of Jane Balmer's time. She meets with him to discuss the complaint. Nothing this time is reported to the Director of Compliance, but there is a meeting with all three. So Kirk Graham, Jane Balmer and David Milgram, they meet to review the account. Okay, well, again, suitability standard proves to be Kirk Graham's undoing here. IPSs must be updated or at least reviewed at least annually. Okay, so, and I say at least reviewed, if there's no changes required to the IPS, then that should be documented. So you're still updating the fact that the IPS has been considered at least 1 year. So breach of suitability there. This time, Jane's done the right thing. Okay, so she held a meeting, she investigated the complaint herself. She didn't need to refer it to the Director of Compliance. In the previous scenario, we said that wasn't good enough. But she sat down with Kirk and the client. She's begun an investigation, so she is now in compliance with her supervisor duties. She doesn't have to report everything to the Director of Compliance as long as she's doing her job properly. Okay, so we're done with the saga of Lionsgate. I hope Kirk Graham and Tony Hill and Nicole Martin don't get into too much trouble, although I think they might be. We'll move on to our final scenario now. This is the story of Gabby Sim. She's now working at Global Harvest Bank, so a private bank providing a range of investment services. And she's being shown around the head honchos. So she's meeting with her supervisor, that's Ahmed Yusuf, he's the Chief Investment Officer. And then she's meeting with a couple of board members, well, a few. We've got the President, who's Irene Wong, and two board members, David Tan and Audrey Chong, who is a CFA charter holder. Okay, they're meeting to discuss a memorandum of understanding that has been agreed with a new institutional client. So they brought this new client on, MGM2. MGM2 is a government-owned fund, like a sovereign wealth fund really, owned by the government of Sasperia, so a nice fake country here. And the idea is that the fund is going to promote the economic development of Sasperia. Nothing wrong there, hope it works. So Yusuf and Wong, so there's Ahmed, that's Gabby's supervisor, and Irene Wong, the president, they've paid David Tan and Audrey Chong part of the advisory fees earned from bringing on MGM2 as a client. Okay, so new client that they've presumably worked on bringing over. So they've received part of the fees as a bonus. That fee sharing agreement was not disclosed to the client itself. Okay. Chong, remember this is Audrey, our CFA charter holder. She's asked Yusuf, that's Gabby's supervisor, to meet Bo He. So Bo He is one of the founders of MGM2, so he's a Saspearian businessman. He's asked Yusuf to meet with him, but she's not disclosed to him that Bo He has given Audrey's son an executive position at MGM2. Okay, so there's just a hint of a conflict of interest here, I think, brewing. Let's have a look at what's going on so far then. So is it okay for Tan and Chong to have received compensation? Well, yes it is. Now it's not a referral fee. You know, these guys work for the board of of their firm. There's no violation of the standard on referral fees because it's not a referral fee. Okay, it's not that they're third-party advisors referring the client to another firm. Okay, they work for the firm. You know, winning clients is part of their job. So no disclosures required on that one, and there's no violation of the standard. As I said a second ago, though, there's a potential conflict of interest. She may well not be acting in the best interest of the firm by asking Yusuf to go and meet Bohi, okay, because her son is an executive at MGM2. She might have one eye on the performance of MGM2 and the success of that, not the performance of her firm, okay, Global Harvest Bank. So, yeah, there's a potential conflict of interest there that should probably have been disclosed. I say probably, I mean definitely, disclosure of conflicts. Okay, so continuing the saga of Gabby Sim, she's been assigned by Ahmed, her supervisor, to open a new account for Bohi. Remember Bohi, one of the businessmen behind the MGM2 fund. The name of the account is Bad Moon Rising Limited. Bad Moon, yeah, I've got the song in my head as well. Now, Bohi is the sole beneficial owner of Bad Moon Rising Limited and is the only authorised signatory. So Gabby Sim has met with Bohi to have a chat with him about goals and objectives. Of course, that's a good idea when we're formulating an IPS. But for whatever reason, she was unable to ask him about it. So she's not asked him about his investment experience, so we don't know the client's level of sophistication. We don't know the client's goals and objectives. What was the purpose of the meeting? Who knows? But he simply refused to answer any of those questions. And instead, he wants all of the notes of the meeting destroyed. So heaven knows what they did talk about, but he wants the notes of the meeting destroyed and replaced with just one statement. So he is a self-employed consultant. This is the statement he wants in the IPS. Net worth of $110 million. Oh, well done. Long-term investment consultant with annual return goals between 5 and 10%. Now, they didn't discuss any of this. So he wants a fictitious record of the meeting inserted into the file. What he did tell Gabby Sim at the meeting is that many large deposits are going to be going into the account from MGM2. So Bad Moon, this is his account. There's going to be some withdrawals from MGM2, deposits into Bad Moon, and they're going to have to be wired to his other accounts across the globe. What a tangled web he's weaving. Gabby, for efficiently handling these transfers, is going to earn a performance bonus. She's informed by Bohi. So that's lovely stuff for Gabby. So Gabby uses the information that he did provide to create an IPS. Remember, this was the statement he wanted inserted in there. Later on, she meets with Yusuf, this is her supervisor, to review the meeting. She does not tell him that he has offered her a bonus for efficiently handling those wire transfers, and then she goes on and opens the account. Oh dear, Gabby, what have you done? Well, let's find out what she's done. She is not permitted to destroy records of the meeting. That's not maintaining appropriate records. If you're thinking about what standard that breaches, it's the record retention standard. No prizes for guessing that one. She really shouldn't destroy the notes. Now, he wants all the notes to be destroyed. Maybe it's confidentiality purposes. Who knows why? If Gabby didn't destroy the notes, she's not in violation of any standard. Clearly that has to be the case. If we're saying at the top bullet point here on the slide that she's in breach of the standard for record retention for destroying the notes, well, it'd be a bit harsh for her to be violating a standard. If she didn't destroy the notes, she'd be between a rock and a hard place. So it doesn't matter that he wants the notes to be destroyed. She would not violate the standard. She is protected by not destroying the notes. She shouldn't have opened the account either. She's not been able, it's not her fault, but she's not been able to do adequate due diligence and client understanding. So we can't put together a reasonable IPS on that basis. So that violates suitability standard. She shouldn't have done so. Wonderful. Okay, let's crack on. The bonus that's promised by Bohi is additional compensation. So by accepting it, she's in breach of that standard. She should have disclosed it. The existence of the bonus could also impair her independence and objectivity. Okay, so there's a few problems with this bonus here. The bonuses are permissible if they're disclosed and approved by the employer. Okay, so Gabby's not disclosed it to Yusuf. There's your big problem. The fact that she hasn't means that she's in breach of the standard for additional compensation. The risk is that she's now going to owe more loyalty to Bohi than she is to her own employer. It may not be the case, but she has to tell the employer that there's a potential conflict of interest there. And of course, the independence and objectivity is exactly the problem. So lack of disclosure really caused Gabby a lot of problems. Okay, so the Bad Moon account is opened. It shouldn't have been, but it has been. Let's continue the case. As promised by Bohee, a large amount of money is wired into the account from the MGM2 fund. Okay, so Gabby tells Bohee we've received a lot of money into the account. She also wants to complete the investment agreement between MGM and Bad Moon. Okay, so unless there's good reasons why there's money going from the MGM account into Bad Moon, then of course the authorities might be suspicious. So she wants an investment agreement to be completed. Given that there isn't one, that's a large chunk of money moving from MGM to Bad Moon, she's not comfortable with that. Okay, so she wants some sort of agreement on file. She raises her concerns with Yusuf. She says to Yusuf that she wants a meeting with Bohee. Hopefully this meeting will go better than the last one. And a representative from MGM2, just to make sure that MGM2 are aware that those funds are moving into Bad Moon and that everything is above board. Yusuf says, don't worry about it. Okay, the current investment agreement is fine. Well, we know from earlier that it's not fine. And that she should contact David Tan and Audrey Chong. They're board members, so she agrees. And the board members simply back up Ahmed's account. So poor Gabby, okay, she knows that everything isn't quite right. She goes to her supervisors to discuss it, and her supervisors tell her, simply get on with it. Okay, well this time I think Gabby's in the clear. Let's see who has misbehaved. Well, it's Yusuf, of course, her supervisor. Gabby has come to him with legitimate concerns. Let's just put that second bullet point up. Gabby's idea about a meeting with he and a rep from MGM2, absolutely fine, should have been arranged. But Yusuf has just simply told her to go away, not bother him with it, and not investigate her concern further. That is poor. So he's in breach of the responsibilities of supervisors, just like our previous supervisor in the scenario was. Gabby talking to the board members is not a breach of confidentiality. They're internal to Gabby's firm, and she was instructed by her supervisor to do so. So there's no confidentiality issues here. All right, continuing the story of Bad Moon, that first transfer was not the only one. So over the next few months, there are several large transfers from MGM2 into Bad Moon. So Bohee provides Gabby with some documentation to back them up. These are simply agreements that have been signed by Yusuf. So it's the Chief Investment Officer of Global Harvest Bank. No investment agreement. We've not seen one between MGM2 and Bad Moon. This money that comes into Bad Moon then transferred to his various personal accounts around the world. Okay, many alarm bells going off in your head, I'm sure. Gabby agrees with you because she suspects money laundering. She tells her supervisor, which of course she is duty bound to do. And once again, Yusuf just can't be bothered with this. He tells her to ignore her suspicions. Okay, Yusuf is not covering himself in glory. He's clearly failed in his duty as a supervisor. Gabby now has a dilemma. Okay, so she really needs to escalate this matter further. Simply being told to go away isn't going to be good enough here because she suspects money laundering. If she does nothing, she could be criminally liable. So she's going to try, well, she should go above Yusuf's head, perhaps to the board or to the president. She could, of course, obtain advice from lawyers, so from legal counsel or the compliance department, but she cannot do nothing. Okay, so let's hope that Gabby has done her duty and she's informed legal counsel, compliance or the authorities. In the meantime, although Bohee might be under suspicion of money laundering, his story continues. So he is asked that Gabby meet with his mother-in-law. So we have Madam Tan Sui Neo. So Gabby meets with her. She's 70 years old and she made all of her money through real estate. At the moment, her investable assets now out of real estate. They're in bonds and low-risk utility stocks. So pretty low risk investments there for Madam Neo. Neo informs Gabby that she wants to be a little bit more aggressive. She wants to fund her grandchildren's education by investing all in stocks, but all conservative stocks. So although an entire allocation to stocks is more aggressive than bonds and utility stocks, we're still talking conservative. So she's not going to be gambling the house on red. You know, these are still fairly low risk investments in the context of equities. So, Neo talks to Gabby about an oil-structured note that she's heard about from her friends. Neo doesn't know anything about it, and she can't read the brochure on the investment because it's written in English, which she does not read. So Gabby talks about the product. She verbalizes the summary for her in Chinese, but she leaves out some of the fine print. Well, as we know, sometimes the fine print is where all the juicy stuff is, so Neo doesn't know about that. Sim tells her verbally there's no guarantee of the annual coupon being paid on the note. It's not certain. And if you try and get out of the note early, these are longer term investments, then there's a severe penalty for early withdrawal. Neo, though, likes what she hears, and she invests half of her life savings in the notes. Gabby, what have you done? Well, what she's done is recommend an unsuitable investment. An all-structured note is not a conservative stock. Okay, by recommending it and by allowing her to invest in it, she's certainly in breach of the standard on suitability. The fact that she's verbalized a summary of what was in the brochure, she didn't summarize it, she left out some of the fine print, so we know the fine print is where a lot of the juicy information is. She did verbally explain the fact that the coupon wasn't guaranteed and the early redemption penalties, but it was only verbal, it wasn't written. It certainly doesn't seem like she's emphasized those conditions very well. So, I sense trouble ahead for Gabby and Neo, and that's exactly what happens. A year later, the coupon payment that she was expecting doesn't happen. And she asks Gabby, what's going on? Redeem the investment immediately, put it into cash, move the funds into a deposit account. Well, of course, there's an early redemption penalty. Gabby did explain this verbally, but not in writing. So she reminds Madam Neo of the early redemption penalties. She doesn't care, right? She's had her fingers burned by the fact that the coupon payment hasn't come as expected. She just wants out. So the investment itself, it has decreased in value from 50,000 to 30,000. Neo's filed a complaint against Gabby. Presumably she's unhappy with what's happened. The fact that Madam Neo has asked to redeem this oil-structured note early is causing even more problems for Gabby. To be fair to Gabby, she did explain it verbally, but she didn't put it in writing. So the fact that Neo's request for the early withdrawal has happened, that indicates that she's forgotten it. Okay, she had a lack of investment knowledge when she went into the structured note. Gabby should have explained it a lot more clearly. Because of that, again, Gabby is in breach of loyalty, prudence and due care, because Gabby should have insisted on explaining clearly in writing what the penalties for early redemption were. The fact that she didn't has caused this current situation to come to pass. Madam Neo just wants out. She's forgotten about the early redemption payment, and Gabby, as a result of the lack of explanation, is in breach of these two standards.